We had that interesting question about the water and energy grids. We've had Ed talking about the need to be a boring utility. What that means, we need to have a single mission, just a big toolbox in order to achieve that. So we're talking about consolidation, and as Lizzie from Lightrock usefully used the phrase, appropriate consolidation. How do we break down silos to get more efficient, but in a way that is appropriate? And we'll be touching on a lot of the different mechanisms for doing that today. So, underneath all of the sessions, we've had the session 2, which pushed us on the silo between pipeline and deployment. What's the gap between what developers say they can build and what they can actually build? We had the session 3, which pushed us on the silo between project finance, portfolio finance, between concessionary and commercial capital. What's running through all of this is something that I'm sensing, and I think you probably are too, is that there is a shift. The sector is shifting from categorical design to more integrated design, from either or to both and all of the interfaces in between. So we're going to be touching on this today, and each of the panelists are dealing with this from various perspectives. So we have Fauzia from GIAP. Thank you, Fauzia, who's dealing with a lot of the interesting, the regulation that assesses these interfaces. We have Samuel from AFOR, again, very much dealing with a lot of different regulators across the continent and looking for some level of harmonization. We have Irene, who's from SE for All Mini-Grids Partnership, but was also a developer. We're going to be touching on some of her experience. We have Matteo from the UNDP, and of course, Camille from Anchor. And this, by the way, yeah, Irene? This is one of Anchor's mini-grids, by the way. Look and learn and be astounded. So, first of all, we're coming to Fauzia. Fauzia, GIAP have been involved in a lot of these very interesting conversations breaking down the binaries. One of my personal bugbears for many years was how national electrification planning had, this is where the grid is the cheapest, this is where mini-grids are the cheapest, and this is where SHS, and never the twain shall meet. I've always thought this is a problem because a lot of the times the poor energy services under the grid will be best served by a partly solarized battery system. It's also a great place to run a commercial mini-grid. You've been directly at the coalface on this in Nigeria, and interestingly, dealing with the regulatory side of it. So we've had platform approaches, you're dealing with the system approaches. Please can you tell us a little bit more about your experience of this interface?
Good evening, everyone, and I'll start by thanking the organizers for the opportunity to be here. So yes, indeed, I think for a long time we've been looking at the wrong question of, on-grid versus off-grid. In fact, in my former life, I started off as on-grid advisor, and then shortly after I became off-grid advisor, and then eventually I became on-grid and off-grid advisor. So yes, this has been, I think the way we have looked at it at the beginning hasn't been perhaps the best way, and the right question really should be what is the kind of system that we need to build that can provide the level of service, to a community, to nations, that is going to be useful for them. Another question that we should be looking at is how can utilities and decentralized, energy systems work together? And I think if we start with that framing or that premise, then everything looks different. How you build, how you fund as well, how you monitor, even how you regulate begins to look very different. And I think for us, the interconnected mini-grid model, which we have been able to support in Nigeria, perhaps is one of the concrete responses to this question currently. And it essentially means, solar batteries, distributed energy resources integrated in distribution networks. And you find that, the utilities and the developers also jointly operating those systems. And it doesn't leave out the community as well. So what you eventually see is it's not a walk around in a weak grid. It's really a redesign of how electricity, can be delivered in distribution level. So what we've seen, in the past few years has been very catalytic. The first aspect I would say is we've had material results, 6,000 plus customers impacted. We've also seen, like 4 communities, which are like the first 4 in Nigeria, currently operational. You have 18 plus hours being supplied in those locations, and these are locations that previously had 1 hour of power or 2, maximum 6 hours. And we also saw cases where it's like intermittent, so today there's power, tomorrow there's none. And this is really because, the utilities are unable to serve those locations. So we've seen material results from these kind of projects. But for me, what's even most important as a result is it's been institutional as well. So you're talking about utilities that have, historically been very risk averse and, have deeply avoided or haven't really opened their doors to, private sector to be engaged. That's how we started. And, I've been privileged to be part of this conversation, even in my previous life when I was at GIZ as well, like over 8 years ago. And I've seen that change happen. And that's why I think that institutional results that we're seeing, where you're seeing discos, utilities, now advancing interconnected mini-grid pipelines, is changing the whole conversation. And you can see an evidence of that even with, the DARES program that has come up, World Bank DARES. And I would say that this initial pilots that we supported was about maybe 3 million catalytic capital provided. But it was provided in a very strategic way, grants and TA. And it was essentially to, de-risk these initial projects. But at the same time, it also coupled that with, some level of ecosystem support. And that means, engaging with the utilities as well as the regulators. So these were embedded very closely in the program implementation. So you have project de-risking, which is important, but is not sufficient if we're trying to achieve the scale that we're hoping to achieve. So what we're able to do with that program was, as we're delivering the pilots, ensure that, there were monitoring frameworks and data that was made available also for the regulator. So that feedback loop where, in fact, we had a lot of, engagements and knowledge sessions where the regulators will sit with us for, a full day and have also the developers in the room, have utilities. And I found that also very stimulating even for everyone, because you find that the developers are excited that the regulator wants to hear from them and understand what's actually happening in the market. And what we've been, I would say, lucky to have to a large extent is a regulator in Nigeria that is very sensitive to the market. So it's like the regulation is also evolving as, basically following the market. So that feedback loop was also something we have consistently integrated into our programs. And so very recently we launched a second layer, a second program, which we're calling Imagine. And the idea is that it's supposed to consolidate this model to make it more mainstream business model. And that involves, also interconnection frameworks, putting some standardization here and there, as well as continuing to integrate, integrate with the regulator. And very recently, I think last week, there was, an update to the regulation of, and 2 weeks ago, exactly, 2 weeks ago, and that, when you see the regulation moving not on theory, but on evidence, and that evidence is literally coming from pilots. And I think that that's something we need to consistently keep in mind. We limit the results we can get from pilots if we look at it, in a siloed way. If we can have pilots designed in a way that it goes beyond just the projects, but you also, find ways to integrate system layer in there. And that might mean, the regulators, but that also means the institutions. And I know we've spoken a lot about, capacity building, and that's something we ensured we integrated in our program. So while we provided capital, grants and TA to de-risk those projects, we also ensured that, within the utilities, we embedded resources there. So you had officers being able to, drive those projects, but at the same time, build the capacity and create units and teams within those institutions. And what we've seen is that they've not only been able to accelerate the projects that perhaps were supported by GIAP, well, Global Energy Alliance. We're not supposed to be saying GIAP anymore, Global Energy Alliance. But at the same time, those structures that have been put in place in those institutions are now also able to advance other projects. And I think a strong signal that we're seeing is really like I said, the DARES. So you can see that philanthropic capital provided perhaps, like I said, 3 million to just do this bit, but it has had a multiplier effect where now the World Bank has brought, about $125 million for, scaling this work. And this money would come, or this money has come largely because there's a model to replicate. And so that means we need to think, broadly beyond our individual or initial projects and really adjust that siloed thinking, but also ensure that the regulator is brought along continuously so that there's that feedback loop and they're refining in a way that helps to scale the program and the model, basically. So that's largely what we've had so far, and we're excited about the new wave or the next wave of these pilots. We just have 3 megawatts now of IMGs in Nigeria, but then the DARES project is, estimating already there's an initial pipeline already that we're seeing of almost 100 megawatts. And we've also ensured that this second phase of the GIAP project is really going to be having the DARES program anchored there. So that means we don't want to, because philanthropic capital is really trying to ensure that catalytic effect.
Yes.
So we've seen that, okay, utilities now are speaking, and they are actually drawing and calling developers to come. Let's work together. And what we found that we only supported 3 utilities, but in Nigeria there are 11, I think now 12. So you also have, a gap. Yeah. And luckily the DARES program is going to be working with about 7 this initial phase. So what we're now doing is that, okay, as a partner, how can we also support that DARES work to be able to realize its targets?
Yeah.
So what we're now doing is ensuring that we can provide that same level of resourcing and even perhaps more to these additional utilities, and at the same time providing additional support to even the developers with the TA and every other support that institutions need so that scale can happen.
Yeah, that's amazing, Fauzia. That's such an interesting approach, and that's it's a classic case of that ecosystem thinking, as you're saying. It's like supporting across the sector. It's really interesting that you're talking about successes from the utility side, because often the utilities are seen as the least progressive, slowest moving part. And if we're talking about an ecosystem approach, they're obviously incredibly important players. And I think, Sammy, you probably have quite a lot to say about this. I mean, with your AFOR tool, you've been dealing with all sorts of governments across the continent at wildly different areas, wildly different levels of capacity, experience, competency. How have you found working with all of these different wide cross-sections of government stakeholders? What are the kind of policy shifts that would really help to bring more of this kind of broad-scale ecosystem thinking? What are the tools? Fauzia mentioned feedback loops and data. Can you speak into that a little bit?
Yeah. Thank you. We share a name. Thank you, Sam. So I like the fact that Fauzia mentioned it's institutional, using the example of Nigeria. The fact is, everywhere we have gone, that's what we have seen. And more people are appreciating that it's not just me that's enabling the sector. I have to listen to the developer, I have to listen to the rural electrification. On Monday, I mentioned that this sector is quite big. If I look at it from the public sector side, you have the Ministry of Energy, you have the Ministry of Finance, you have rural electrification, you have national planning. Then that's when you bring in the private sector, and the private sector is also much wider. So in seeing all of this, what we have realized is that Africa tends to think that we're so different, but actually Africa has more similarities than differences. We tend to tell the regulators 75% of the problems you have are similar to the problems someone else in another jurisdiction has. I can give you examples. The problems in Uganda are similar to the problems in Nigeria. Yet you will find that there are different curves in maturity. So this is why we tend to think that the push towards harmonization, I know, and most people have been using the word standardization, but we need to know there's a bit of a difference. Most regulators will tell you they don't want standardization, but they are very happy with harmonization. And when we talk of harmonization, what we are saying is similarities across everything we do, but taking into account those few differences, the 25% that I was mentioning. But also what we have seen is that this approach is showing that countries are more than willing to learn from one another. I can tell you the number of requests that we deal with in AFU where a country is saying, we want to learn from Nigeria, we want to learn from Uganda, we want to learn from Senegal. It just shows the level that we are reaching in this sector. People don't want to go through what Nigeria went through to start. They're saying Nigeria is ahead of the curve, and many people don't like me saying it, but you could say they're the most mature mini-grid market in Africa. So they have done things. They have learned lessons. So now those lessons, other countries want to pick them and know, okay, how can we customize this to ourselves? What can we pick from them? We don't need to repeat their mistakes. We can just simply pick what has worked for them and we see it works for us and then push it forward in our own countries. This is going to help in such a way that you will find that, because one of the issues that we face in Africa is a lack of benchmarks, you'll find that it will become easier to now benchmark off one another if you're harmonized in the way you do things. You can easily tell, okay, how does data look here? How does data look here in Kenya? How does data look, let's say, in Senegal or in Togo? And you'll then be able to make faster decisions. And we know that the private sector always says public sector, we're slow. But faster decision making just because of all this harmonization. And these are things that we have been seeing, at least for the last, you could say 3-4 years. That's where the trend is pushing towards harmonizing. Let's do things in a similar way. Yeah.
Thank you, that's really interesting. And I think the word that I'm taking from this, which I like, is this harmonization. I think we can definitely align around the fact that all of us are harmonized on the idea of delivering electricity, delivering kilowatt hours. Viv, I don't know if you're still in the room, yeah, there's a nice example of how we need to switch beyond connections towards kilowatt hours. It's about the delivery of the service. It's not the mechanism to deliver that service. Now, a bit of pushback on that, and Irene, I want to run this past you. You've been involved in lots of different parts of the ecosystem as a developer and otherwise. It's all very well to say, let's harmonize around the delivery of kilowatt hours, but there are wildly different contexts to deliver kilowatt hours, from the deep off-grid and rural to the peri-urban to the urban. How does one deal with the delivery of a service with such a diverse set of responses that need to be given? How would you say we could address some of those challenges?
Thank you for the question, Sam. So I would say that the first thing is that we start speaking about technologies and not business model. Like we keep calling a solar home system to a PV panel and a battery. We keep calling mini-grid to a decentralized solution with cables and poles. And by doing that, we keep assimilating to a certain technology, a certain business model, like if it was the same thing, and it's not. So I think one of the things, if we imagine a world and a situation in which all the technologies, PV rooftop, decentralized solution, connection to the main grid, are serving kilowatt hours, in that case, we wouldn't be talking about different technologies, we will be talking about the difference between rural connections and urban connections. Because I think that's, in terms of operations, where the difficulty where the difference relies. Like, for example, in rural connections, you will always have the problem of the accessibility, for example, among the usage of electricity, etc., building the demand, but that is not related to that much to a technology, but really to the rural areas. So I think it's about time that we start talking about delivering kilowatt hours. I can even understand, and I have contradictions towards what the PV rooftop should do, minimum level of service to be determined. But in any case, we need to start, when we talk about modularity. A lot of times we've been talking in the past in modularity, like, oh, I start with a mini grid of 20 kilowatt peak, and then I move to a mini grid of 40 kilowatt peak. I think it's about time to talk about modularity through the different technologies, in the sense of, if a house for the moment has a really low consumption, just put a PV rooftop panel, maybe selling kilowatt hours, not under pay as you go. So you put this PV model, and then at some moment you need more consumption, interconnect different PV panels. Oh, now that we call mesh grid. Okay. And then you need more generation. Maybe you can install a generation source centralized in the village. We call that a mini grid. And then you need more. But for me, that's the modularity, not that much the same technology to increase the volume.
That's really interesting, and I think that the sense of that, it's about delivering kilowatt hours and having a diversity of customers, a diversity of contexts in which to deliver. And Camille, I think I would like you to, you have been quite unusual as a mini grid developer, because you've stepped out of this technology business model specific type of approach, and I know that with your collaboration with Moon, you are now looking at multiple technologies, delivering service through energy as a service, but the actual technology itself is not specific. Can you talk to us about that slightly different, slightly innovative approach that you've taken to this multi-technology, arguably modular approach to service? Irene, could you pass the mic?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the question. And just a very quick word. Actually, we're going to use that. So yes, this is one of our sites. Very proud of it, and I'm getting a little emotional that it's on display here. But let's take it as an example of concrete. So this is a site in southern Madagascar, nearly 600 kilowatt capacity. That is the capacity for the main grid. Now, this grid is serving a bunch of different customers, household, businesses, semi-industry, and public services. We actually don't see it here, but on the top of the photo, there's a GSM tower connected to it. And this is part of the answer. There is, part of the answer is not about the energy system or the energy technology itself, but it is how about energy connects to other sectors and other activities as well. So here we are integrating digitization and connectivity to the energy project. So energy being sort of the starting points for a lot of other things. Then we would have actually on the right side of the photo built an in construction, semi-industry, agro-processing facility for processing cassava into flour, for instance, to be sold on the local markets. Then we would have a bit further in the village, on the top far of the photo, schools and healthcare centers that we are helping through going digital and connectivity as well. Now those are the sectors, the nexuses that we are building between energy and other sectors. And I think that this is part of the answer, because the evolving role of mini grids and the notion of integration, this is part of it. This is how we bring mini grid into an ecosystem, and how we make the mini grid serve a purpose, not just create electrons, but what we do with these electrons. The second part of the answer is actually part of what you mentioned, partly. So this is the main grid. This is a ready to be interconnected mini grid, meaning that with this large capacity and its distribution network that is made of both low voltage and medium voltage sections, this mini grid can welcome an interconnection with either another mini grid, which is actually what's on the plan at the moment, or the main grid. Second is what you mentioned about the collaboration with Moon, the integration between a infrastructure company specialized in mini grids and so on, with a semi-infrastructure model, and that's exactly what the energy as a service model is about, considering the solar kits. So very small products, actually. So it's less about the product itself or the device, but the model behind. And I agree with Irene here. We have to consider both, right? But we are using different technologies to serve a same purpose, again, and to combine within one same model. So energy as a service does that. So in that place, in that locality, mini-grid serves and connects more than 1,000 different customers. Then we have hundreds, if not 1,000 solar kits distributed. Some are distributed in the surroundings, but some within the same space of the grid, because as you say, and you mentioned it, some customers would like to start with a small device for their very specific need, and once they'll be ready, then the grid will be there to welcome them. And we can do that with something that I just learned about, with power blocks, for instance, that could be for SMEs instead of a household. So we are combining the two solutions, integrating different solutions, different technologies within one same project. Now, just moving a little bit forward and talking about the next step, because now there is a mini-grid, there are nexuses, and there are solar kits through energy as a service. We are building the next step through what we call a corridor, using the mini-grids as an anchoring element for further deployment and further energy access. We would use, because next to this one, like a few dozens of kilometers away, there is another one that looks like that, roughly 500 kilowatts. And we are already working on this vision of interconnected both, increasing the overall capacity, increasing the MV distribution lines, and targeting an entire region, so having a regional approach, a more bigger approach, but more integrated approach. We would use this as sort of the backbone of our penetration within the area, and we would increase then the solar kits distribution to reach even further and more people. Then that would allow us to consider building standalone mini-grids in a bit far away villages that we would have never considered in a normal approach. We would have said, oh, this is a one site, I'll do that. Oh, but the other one, 40 kilometers away, no, it's too small, doesn't make sense. But with this approach, actually we can consider it. And it does fit into the business model and keeps the economics well. And even further that, or in between, yes, mesh grid or nanogrids, or any kind of in-between solutions that would fit and that would serve the very purpose. So, just pausing here, but that's a concrete example, and it's happening. It's already there.
That's beautiful. So you're describing to me super mini-grids, interconnected mini-grids that are connected together, connected to the grid, isolated mini-grids, SHS system. There's a real variety, a real diversity of approaches to do the same thing, which is about the delivering of the service, the kilowatt hours. There is a huge diversity, but the thread running through it, as you say, is what is the model behind it? I think that's really interesting. Speaking of diversity, Matteo, nobody knows more about diversity than you, running the AMP project with 21 countries. That's an extraordinary amount of diversity, both of capacity, of size, of cultural diversity. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you've been threading some kind of commonalities through this diversity? What are some kind of lessons that you've learned which are common across both? Is that something you could tell us a little bit more about?
Thanks, Sam. I'm not sure about the qualification, but I'll take it. And actually, I also want to reflect on some elements that the other Sam from AFUR has mentioned in terms of commonalities. Because although each country has its specific circumstances and context, there is a lot of commonalities that we are seeing across implementation in the 21 countries. And we actually are working on a regional publication on our assessment on de-risking renewable energy investments. And we actually have challenges to do, interesting takeaway at the granular level of at the national level, because there's so much synergies in terms of the risk and the distribution of these risks that we are seeing across countries. So I think we have to recognize those commonalities and also work into common solutions that can be adaptable to the national context. And the type of event that we have today are so important for that. And I know there's fatigues about conference and events, but at the same time, the richness of the exchange that we are seeing in these last 3 days that we have been here show that it's still essential. And having a full room like that, speaking on mini grids from 9 a.m. to almost 5 p.m. now, with still a level of engagement and excitement is something amazing, right? And we're glad, and congrats to all the organizers for that. We also are seeing opportunities for further standardization. We have been developing a quality assurance framework for mini grids, which is being embedded in a regional and national digital platform. So this is also an opportunity for us to start analyzing with much more granular level how the assets are being managed by the different countries, what are the different challenges, what are the different impacts that we can have to the deployment of these mini grids. And we are doing that in an open source manner. So we are following open code principles. So we also hope that many people in the room will be using this digital platform and come up with fun plugs in and add-on that we can also replicate at the national level. Finally, I'll just add on, the exciting elements that Camille and Irene and Fauzia has shared in terms of integrated technologies. And the one thing I haven't heard in these last 3 days is how do we integrate e-mobility into that. And I think that's where the future resides as well. A lot of opportunity on two-wheelers, three-wheelers for integration into the mini-grid infrastructure. And we are actually looking to develop new projects taking that into consideration. So if anyone has interest in experience on that, I want to hear on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My personal view on that, on the EVs, I think of EVs as being a productive use of energy. And I think it's about the service. In the same way that Camille was talking about the cell phone towers, that's a productive use of energy through communications. Likewise, supporting connectivity at a school, I would argue that's a productive use of electrically powered productive use.
But I'll take you on that, because I do see EVs as a storage opportunity.
This is true.
So it's beyond productive use. So it's not only demand side.
Yep.
It's actually part of the system.
Yep.
Because you can actually reach to households that would be connected through solar home systems without a solar home system.
Yeah.
You can actually use the battery from the e-bike to connect and provide basic energy services.
100%.
So there is an opportunity beyond productive use.
Would you say perhaps an opportunity that suggests modularity and a diversity of technical approaches? I think that's, yes, Camille, please.
Yeah, no, just very quickly, but to answer the question, if we talk about e-mobility, like how we would do it, like the rest of it, just pretty much the same. So it's just another tool in the toolbox that we can integrate. We haven't done it because we haven't done it all, I guess. And I didn't even mention e-cooking, for instance, and we do. But e-mobility, that's the only one that we didn't have checked on our list. But to be honest, I don't see any limitation. Like I mentioned, that if this is the backbone, and that then because of it we can more easily penetrate the region, the markets, increase penetration, electrification rate, and so on, then why not consider having a hub of battery charging, and use it for vehicles that can also be used, like you say, to as a battery for consumption in a remote foyer or household.
Just one point on that. So what I think we are saying all the time is the fact that we often talk about electricity like, oh, I have a light bulb in my house. And at the end of the day, what we are talking, and all these things that we call productive use, e-mobility, cooking, it's just development, guys. That's why it's SDG 7. I mean, it's just how to, from electricity to lead to development. And I think that's the key question that sometimes we forget.
That's very true. We're running on time. I think we're talking about diversity here. We're talking about the practitioners who are taking multiple technology approaches to get common goals, the delivery of kilowatt hours. What we have not had a chance to talk about is diversity of financing. How do you sensibly finance diverse approaches like this? I think that's a question we will leave for you guys to discuss. Ed Borgstein, I don't know if you're still here, you had a good answer to this, but going towards the ability to think of ourselves as a boring utility, having a tariff on one part of the utility, subsidizing other parts of the utility. I think that's a very interesting question for us to discuss. But I'm going to leave it there. I'd like you to all put your hands together for a fantastically interesting discussion. Q&A. Yes, okay. So, any questions for our panel?
Hi guys, I'm back. So I can't, this is, as Matteo said, it's quite amazing. We have a full room talking about mini grids. It's fantastic. We said in the beginning, you're either wildly passionate about the sector or you perhaps were lost, but no, it's fantastic that we stayed to the end. After having consulted with a few people, I can see we're a little bit tired and the energy is sort of, I can see a few tired faces. So we were going to have a final breakout group. However, I feel like now we can open the floor and end it on a participatory note. We'll have a Q&A with the panelists. So a lot of really interesting things were said. If you'd like to come in and raise your hand, we'd love to have open the Q&A.
So yes, please put your hands up if you've got a question for any of the panelists. And while you do that, I'd like to ask the panelists, I cut some of you off in the interest of time. Are there anything that you felt, burning issues that you would like to address now that we've got a moment longer? Anything that I didn't ask you that you would like to speak to? Camille? Yes, please.
Private companies, private sector always have a few more things to say. Two things to comment on your comments about financing. This is a real bottleneck and a real struggle at the moment and we've experienced it. So from our experience, the financing instruments or the financier themselves are not necessarily ready to consider different technologies at the same time or within the same envelope, which makes it very difficult for us to build an integrated system approach, because this forces us to do it on a piece-by-piece approach. And then we are left alone to put the pieces together, which is a much harder and much more complicated work. So small advice or small recommendation or on the wish list for Christmas, next Christmas, for financiers, please try to consider different technologies at the same time and don't leave us put the pieces together at the end. Let's do it from the very beginning. That will make much more sense and be much more efficient and be much more profitable. The second comment I want to make, sorry, and I know we didn't have time to discuss it, but you and I briefly talked about it. All of this and this integrated approach also is only possible if the regulatory framework allows it. So at the moment, it's not that it's against, it's that it's a gray area. So it's not really putting lots of obstacles on the way. In some cases, yes, but it's not supporting it either. So there's still a lot of work to be done there to work, to coordinate and to help the government, the public institutions improve the regulatory framework to include and consider this as an option, because we are now not talking anymore about a concession for one locality or its very surrounding. We are now talking about a very wide approach with multiple localities and their surroundings. So it's even at a regional level, and they're not ready yet for that either. And so, yeah, still a lot of work to be done there. But sorry, I'm tired as well. But it's on the way. We've been working on this corridor approach for the past 2.5 years. We're now getting to a momentum with some financiers and some donors to actually fund this. We already got some TA to support us in the pre-feasibility study, and we're now getting to the next phase of detailed feasibility study, especially to build the backbone and to secure the concessional approach, which will probably be one of the trickiest part of the job.
Thank you. Just to flag that to regulators out there, a conversation piece for your next home meeting. How can we get consolidated, integrated regulation to allow these more integrated technological approaches? That's a question for the week. Yes, Irene, you wanted to feedback on that? And then I'm going to go to you, Fauzia, and then I think Samuel also had something to say. Irene.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on what Camille was saying, and it's exactly what we were mentioning before. I think it's important to stop calling technologies by their business model and not by what they are, because at the end of the day, if we talk about solar home system, mini-grid, and even the transmission, cable, poles, panels, batteries. And that's the message to be sent, I think, to all the founders and saying, okay, stop. We need to cut the silos, not only in the vocabulary, but also in the way we are financing, in the way our platforms are working. If we are really going to a convergence, we need to have that in mind. And one point also, it's about alignment in the sense of sometimes we find the situation that Camille was starting describing in which the regulation is not there yet, so you end up in this gray area, which allows you for doing some stuff, but the problem is then to get the debt. It always gets more tricky because you don't have a proper regulation, it's way more complicated, so the alignment has to be on the regulatory frameworks. We need to start sharing experience because, for example, what Camille is mentioning in Zambia, with Rockefeller and GIAP, we are trying to do something similar, and we are right now working on a regional concession or cluster concession on how to do it. And I think that's a new area in which we need to put the efforts, because there are 3-4 different organizations, entities working on this, but for the moment it's too scattered. And we need to start collaborating and cohesioning that.
Yeah, I completely agree. So just another thread I want to pull through. Camille, this is one of the words that you used about this critical infrastructure that's got to emerge. We've got to break down the silos, but we've also got to build something. And that critical infrastructure, I think it applies to regulation as much as it applies to many more. I know, Fauzia, you and I have talked about this creation of critical infrastructure, and I'd be interested to hear your views as a financier about how are you approaching some of these more critical infrastructure questions.
Thank you. And I wanted to, I think Irene's point on collaboration is very apt, very important actually. And she also mentioned, shared experience. And so I'm a strong believer of learning, and if we're doing the same things consistently and we're not learning from past experiences and ensuring that subsequent projects, subsequent initiatives, ideally if you do projects, then you should expect that what we'd like to see is that those projects subsequent projects rather are done cheaper over time, faster, as well as less certain. And a lot of that is, anchored on what we're learning and how much we're also syncing up and exchanging, how we're sharing our experiences. I just wanted to, double click on that there's a strong factor of learning and, sharing that we need to really, imbibe as a principle if we're going to really achieve, our collective ambition. And speaking to that, maybe I'll respond to, your point as well in terms of the e-mobility work. So, in Nigeria, there's been a number of projects and pilots that have integrated e-mobility two-wheelers in, mini-grid systems. So I think that's also, something that, perhaps can be, shared. I know, RMI, REA, also supported by GIAP, did, a number of pilots around that. So I think there are a lot of things to learn from that experience. And then coming still double clicking on learning, and maybe this is a question for the room in terms of, I know it has been mentioned a few times here around the metering crisis that's before all of us right now. And when I think about it, because I've had to have conversations here and there with different people, for me, what I keep thinking is, okay, what have we learned from this experience? What are the lessons that we need to really identify and keep that in mind as we, figure out how we move forward. So, and for me, what I see is that, there are certain infrastructure layers that perhaps should be, shared sector infrastructure, shared sector utilities, not competitive assets. And that's one, strong lesson I'm seeing from the current crisis. And when you think about, for me, when you think about infrastructure, it's not necessarily, the hard, there's hard infrastructure, but I'm also thinking about, the softer side of infrastructure. I know that part of, the conversation, like, has been mentioned, open source, and we know, open data systems, but also, you have, standardized frameworks as well. To me, those are also, shared infrastructure, shared sector infrastructure that also enables that scale beyond a single pilot. And that also, reduces that divide in terms of siloed approaches. But at the same time, and it has been mentioned here, since the beginning of the sessions where a lot of developers have spoken about, building their capacity internally. Talent and talent pipeline is also infrastructure, and we need to really focus on investing into that. Additionally, something I see in our sector is, fragmentation, across, TA providers, and then, linking to investors. So even in terms of coordination structures and how that is done and synced up is also shared sector infrastructure, because we can perhaps do more with the resources that we have, and we can go further if we have, better coordination. And I'll end by saying, so when we think about infrastructure, I think that that's an underinvested aspect of our sector now that we need to look into. And, it speaks to, all of the metering aspects that I mentioned, but at the same time, there's this infrastructure. And for us, as, the Global Energy Alliance, we've recently, been curating a platform. I know there's been conversations about platform. Everybody has this platform here. And we're currently calling it a developer support platform. And it's really, it's still in the works, and I would really love to have more conversations with, anyone that, would like to, just brainstorm, because it's currently being shaped, but ultimately it's built or being shaped around, some core constraints that we're seeing. One is this ecosystem level, solutions and, the issues that we're seeing, and that's where, this metering issue perhaps, could fall under if we're going to, support that, and just broader ecosystem solutions that the sector needs. And that also, embeds how we coordinate ourselves, as, TA providers, so we ensure that there's no stranded TA. So a developer is not, trying to figure out, I've gotten this level of TA, and where do I go to next, and so that's syncing up so that it eventually leads to investments and the actual outcomes that we're expecting. So all of that work is part of this platform that we're looking at. And then the second core is really how we provide catalytic capital, to developers as well. So company level and, sector-wide level. And so for that company level, we're looking to really focus on, local and early stage, but at the same time, perhaps, really finding a way to also support innovative models and some of these things that Irene has spoken about, and Camille and everybody here. So that's also going to be, another focus of this potential platform that we're currently working on. So my hope is that, we can, roll up our sleeves, but also really learn from, what has happened and figure out how we can work together, as TA providers, as donors, as investors, and, connect the dots so we're synced up in a way that we're able to achieve, the results that we hope for in a more efficient way, in a faster way, and perhaps even in a cheaper way, because we're utilizing and maximizing the resources that we have to go further. So that's where I'll stop. And I welcome any, conversations.
Connect up the dots, get out of our silos, ecosystem approaches. There is a question here, but before we get onto the question, Samuel, you had something you would like to add to this. I'm going to bring my microphone over here because I don't think you've got one. And we'll wait for Samuel, and then you can ask your question.
Yeah.
We have a first question.
Oh, you do? Oh, sorry, I didn't see.
Oh, okay. So I just wanted to respond to what Camille said about the regulators, regulations. I'm in the unfortunate position of having to be their voice. Most times what we have seen is that regulators across Africa are at different levels. Secondly, regulators tend to be in the negative side of the information asymmetry gap. So you will find that the rest of the sector knows a lot more compared to the regulators. But now with the changing trends, we have, Fauzia mentioned it, the fact is regulators that were closed off are now open. They're eager to learn. So bring this information to them, because they will, and many of them will tell you the same thing. We cannot help you if we don't know what your problem is. That's what they'll simply tell you. So if you have this new information, bring it to them, because the fact is many regulators, and I'll be honest, when it comes to mini grids, some regulators are like Nigeria, dynamic. The regulations are moving, fast-paced, learning from the market. Other regulators, yeah, they have the regulation, tick, and it's just there. They're not doing anything with it. Others completely have nothing. They're just starting out, or even probably you find this is a regulation from 2005, but we're in 2026, more than 20 years. So that information asymmetry, their willingness, they're very open to do that. So I just had to protect the regulators and give their point of view as well.
Thank you.
Yes.
Great sign. So we had a couple of questions. I think the gentleman here perhaps
Yeah, thank you. Moritz, I'm here with two hats, so I'm representing Powerbox, but also Quintana Energy, former Africa Cleantech Madagascar. And I want to touch base on two things. I'm going to keep it brief. The one was the scattered financing mechanisms for rural development companies, let's say, because we're doing, with Quintana Energy, we're doing mini-grids, we're doing nanogrids, we're doing solar home systems, we're doing standalone systems. We also do e-mobility, by the way. So we're developing at the moment two electromobility charging hubs with a Swiss society. And we are also following up there on a new approach that we take those as anchor clients and then actually start nanogrids or mini-grids from that anchor client. So that's one thing ahead. About the financing, it is in fact a big issue for us, because we're developing electrification in a whole region, but I'm handling around 8 financing mechanisms to do one thing, to give access to electricity for people. And that creates not just issues on our side, but also for the financiers, because they all do their due diligence, they do all their KYC, put a lot of effort and a lot of hard work into it. So yeah. I'm very happy to have that conversation and to see how we can get those things together and have maybe different envelopes within the same financing mechanism. To have one envelope, I don't know, $600 for a mini-grid connection, 350 for a nanogrid connection, and so on, but have that in the same framework and in the same financing contract. Thank you.
I would like to definitely flag that. So siloed due diligence. How much effort, how much resources spent on lots of different financiers doing lots of different due diligence, often on the same company, ... to be answered at another point. Please, sir.
Yeah, a question to probably Camille and the other panelists as well. Could the integration model probably bring in public sector? And bringing in public sector, I mean by interconnected mini-grids, probably public sector taking up the responsibility of the transmission line, and you as a developer concentrating on the asset, on the power plant, like we see in the IPP sector, for example. And I'm also thinking about the risk analysis that you're doing, Irene, where the developer bears 80% of the risk of all this, asset, because the asset is the mini-grid, is the transmission line, is a meter installed in every the customer. So I don't know. Is it absurd to think that public sector can come in and be integrated into this integration model, and also probably use some of those compact and N300 money through public sector to fund some of the governments to build those transmission lines?
Yes, please, Camille, will you address that?
Yeah, thanks. To address this question and try to be brief, that's a very fair point and a very good point. And I can tell from our experience what I talked about, that we're working on these corridors for a couple of years and that we've finalized pre-feasibility study, moving towards now detailed feasibility study. 3 main corridors. two of them, they do have a national utility components. Because in the corridor that we're considering, just take one of these two examples, we have a large mini grid, almost 500 kilowatts in that area. We identified a bunch of localities of villages that are too small for a standalone mini grid. We'll probably go for mesh or nanogrid or decentralized solutions plus solar kits. But this is in between our 500 kilowatts and a potential of 2 megawatt capacity on a town that is at the moment administered by the national utility. It's a potential of the demand is up to 2 megawatts, but the national utility is only delivering 300 kilowatts, so way lower than the demand is. And so we are integrating this perimeter, so their perimeter, within the corridor approach. Now there's a big question mark, and there are multiple paths forward. We haven't answered that question yet because this means more talks and an alignment with the national utility as well as the government themselves, because this is the national utility. It's not just a company or a utility. And they have a concession rights. So we have to take that into consideration. Now, the possibilities we see at the moment, or that we've considered and that we're working on, one could be for us to take over as through a sub-concession, let's put it simple, so through a sub-concession mechanism, which would end up basically in paying them royalty or something for their main concession rights. They will be saving money. That would be a win-win, actually, but it's more difficult to swallow the political pill, I guess. But basically they would remain the main concessional stakeholder. We would do the job, investments and operation and so on. We would take care of the customers and everything, but they would be integrated through this contracting mechanism. This is one way of doing it, probably the safest for us. The other path, which is probably going to be easier for them to consider, is to somehow share responsibilities and scope of works in this very perimeter, at least in a first phase. So we might be facing the project so that they can see what is interesting for them. We might, we go back to your second part of the question, the risk analysis and the risk sharing. So obviously it might be a little bit more complex, but might still open the door and make it happen. So we're working on it, and not clear yet. I don't want to get into too much detail, but it would be a share of responsibility, scope of work on their territory, but allowing us through obviously a very clear contracting, to make it happen. But this is definitely a part that we are considering in our scope of work.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to do a bit of a reality check also in terms of the complexity of that technology integration, and I think it's more of a key takeaway from the discussions that we're having here in this panel, but also throughout the day, and that is us, and that means all the TA provider and development agencies and DFI MDBs in the room need to come together and really think of what tendering means in a multi-technology framework. And that's something, I invite us all to reflect, and you already mentioned it, Sam, and both Sams actually, in terms of the dynamic regulator, but we need to take on this heads-on and need to take on that fast, because I think that will be a bottleneck if we're not able to address it quickly.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the audience, please? I think if not, I would like to say once again thank you very much to the panel. Can we give them a big round of applause? Ladies and gentlemen, these are all very, very important subjects. You've heard some really interesting pieces about stepping out of silos, taking connections away from the story. It's about kilowatt-hour service-based approaches. I hope you've learned something today. Thank you to Caroline and the team. Back to you.
Thank you so much, and thanks, Sam, for that excellent moderation. So we've come to the end of a very long but extremely interesting day. I'd like to thank everybody in the room and all of our speakers and of course our partners, IOC, AMAP, SE for All, AMDA, and the whole list of the people that have supported this event. Really fantastic engagement from everyone. Just wanted to remind that this is part of a series, so it's not the first time we've done this kind of workshop, it's not the second time. We're sort of talking about a rebranding away from the word workshop, because it's kind of not really what it is. It's really like a market validation, hearing from what's actually happening on the ground, and what's really important here is the perspectives from people actually doing the work and actually shaping the sector. So again, thank you. We'll be in touch. Look, we do, we have a bit of a QR code. So if you scan it, you give us your email, then we can be more in touch. Otherwise, of course, you know where to reach us. And just another big thank you. Have a great, I think there's drinks happening. There's a Comesa drinks, I've been told, by the waterfall, but Eleni knows more. So if anyone who wanted alcohol, she knows where.
Thank you, Caroline. So as she mentioned, our partner Comesa is hosting a reception at 6 p.m. So it's taking place next to the Kigwa Cafe by the waterfall. So we hope we will see you there. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, that's a close.
When? What time? 6 p.m. Okay. Waterfall alcohol. So waterfall alcohol. 6 p.m. Really well done. Really well done. Thank you. Alcohol.